Hi everybody, Tom Chapman again, and back with another video. This time we're going to talk about how to create basic roles and role options within your macros. Now again, before we get started, please remember that I am not a computer programmer, and I have learned all of this as an amateur, kind of going about it, figuring out what I needed to do at each step. So again, some of the code that you'll see is going to be messy, and I'm going to refer to things by their wrong name, so I apologize for this ahead of time, but hopefully you find this video helpful. So let's go ahead and start from the beginning. Let's make a macro from scratch, and we'll kind of go through what each aspect is as we do it. So here's what I'm going to do. I've got my hero selected again. I've already got this attack macro, but let's go ahead and create a new one. I'm going to right-click here and click on Add New Macro. There's my new macro. It just says new. I'm going to right click on it, edit, and I'm going to give it a label. Let's just call it I attack, and let's leave its group out, and let's go ahead and go down here to the command, and I'm just going to type in I attack the darkness, and I'm going to hit OK. Now when I come up to my macro that says I attack, I'm going to click on it, and I have successfully started my first macro, and it just spits this out, which is everything that was in the command line. Now let's go ahead and add to it by creating a die role. I'm going to right click and go back into edit. In order to actually do some coding, we have to use brackets and braces. Without these, MapTool does not read them as programming commands and just sends everything as text to chat. If it isn't between these, it is sent as plain text. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. I'm going to add a space after here, and I'm going to add a bracket, a left bracket that says 1d20, and a right bracket to close it off. So now what I'm saying is MapTool. When I execute this macro, read this, I attack the darkness, exclamation point, add a space, and then in between these brackets, roll 1d20. I'm going to click OK. Click I attack, and now I have this. I attack the darkness. The result is an 11. Let's make it a little more complicated. Let's say I know that at all times my attack modifier is a +7. So now it's going to, in between the brackets, execute this 1d20, and then whatever that result is, add 7 to it. And now I have a 26. And there we have a very basic die roll. I could change the first part of the d20 to be as many d20s as I wanted if it was a different system or something odd like that. And so if I go into here, I can go ahead and replace that one, let's say, with a 4. So we see a big difference. 4d20 plus 7, I attack. Got a big number that time. I'm going to go back in here and change it back to 1. Now let's talk about role options that you should be aware of. Currently, what the brackets are doing is they just split out what is inside the brackets from what is outside of them. And once you run the macro, you'll see that these numbers down here in the chat are all gray. So what happens is this is the result of what's in the bracket. If I hover over it, it shows a tooltip. So for this last one, it shows 4d20 plus 7 equals 57 plus 7. So what that tells me is that when the 4d20 were rolled, it totaled 57. Added 7, got my 64. We can change that by replacing the brackets with braces instead. So if I come in here, delete this left bracket, replace it with a left brace, delete the right bracket, replace it with a right brace, that'll do something slightly different. I'll click it, and you'll notice that my result no longer is gray. And when I hover over it, there's no tooltip. So the gray kind of tells me I have a tooltip. No gray or just white background tells me that it's just a basic roll. So brackets and braces. I tend to use brackets when I roll and make my different roll options. Now we can change how things are output into the chat based on what we call roll options. So if I open up I attack, I'll show you how these different roll options are affected. Now to use roll options, we're going to use brackets. And I'm going to start with my first one. I'm going to start with R. And I'm going to put in this bracket R colon. So I have bracket, left bracket, R colon, what I want to execute, then the left bracket. Then the right bracket to close it out. Click OK. I attack. This just says spit out what's in between these two brackets. Don't give me any tooltips. Don't tell me anything like that. That's all I want is what's between them. It's the same as braces. The R roll option and braces create the same thing. I'm going to go back in here. Now sometimes we want to hide everything that's inside the brackets. So I could replace that R with an H, click OK, and click I attack. Now it just says I attack the darkness. We can't tell though, but it still executed the code. This is good for long strings of code that you don't really care to see. This is helpful also for setting variables, we'll talk about that in another video, that you don't really need to see either. So for example, if I come up here to this original attack macro, in order for the outcome down here that I just have as outcome, I have to do a whole bunch of things. A window needs to pop up, an attack roll needs to be made. I need to figure out what the total attack, which is the attack roll plus the attack bonus, and then the total damage, which has an evaluation. And to be completely honest, all of this stuff here I don't need to see. I also don't need to see this when I'm figuring out code, and I don't need to see all of this. So really what happens is when I execute this specific macro, I just see the outcome. Everything else is hidden because I don't need to see it twice. If I go back up here to this macro, I can edit it and now replace the H with an E. This is an expanded version of what I usually see. So if I click it, I see I attack the darkness, and then this is the expanded. The original 1d20 plus 7 equals 6 plus 7 equals 13. So ultimately my result is 13. This just expands it all out so that when it's output, you can see everything that goes into it. I can come back in here and I'm going to replace my E with a U, which is unformatted and is similar to the expanded view that we just saw, but there's no tooltip. It just shows us everything like that. So if I'm sorry, not a tooltip. It just shows us everything without color or font changes or anything like that. Coming back up here, another option we have is T. Now this automatically results in a tooltip. So I attack the darkness 27. So when I hover over the 27, it shows me the tooltip. Now I can change this to add an argument to my tooltip. So if I right click and go back into edit, if I go after that T and then put a left parentheses, quotation mark, and let's say attack roll, the statement attack roll, put another, whoops, this is in the wrong spot. Let me move that to where it should be. Put another end quote, finish it with a right parentheses, and I accidentally deleted my right bracket, so I need to make sure I put that back in or I'll get an error. Now when I click OK, it still evaluates everything, but now instead of spitting out a result like this first one, it just spits out the word attack roll. But when I hover over it, it still shows me what the tooltip is. That's just an option you can use. I've never actually used that one. Now I could also come up here to my macro again and open it. And the first time what I did is in the parentheses, I made a special argument. And I said, no matter what the result after the colon, always display what's in the parentheses. Now these quotation marks just say, output this as text. Don't evaluate it. Don't do anything like that. Now if I delete these, now it's going to try to run it as code. Now that would make something weird. So let me just do this. I'm going to instead replace what's in the parentheses with 1d20 plus 7, just like what's on the other side of the code. What this is going to result in is when I select it, it's going to give me most likely two different results. So the result that it gave me in the parentheses is 14, but if I hover over it, no, that wasn't a good example. It gave me the exact same roll. Let me give that again. So this time, the attack roll is 10, and that's what happened in the parentheses, but if I hover over it, the roll in the code was 11. So just be aware what you put in that parentheses. If you want it to say the same thing for whatever reason you might have, it will evaluate those as two separate arguments. Next is the command G, or the roll option G. So I'm going to take everything after that T and delete it, and I'm going to type just the letter G. What this means is that anything evaluated after the colon will only be displayed to anybody logged in as a GM. So I click OK, and I click I attack. And it kind of looks the same as the tooltip roll, but this time, if I were to hover over that, or to see this from a player's screen, I would only see I attack the darkness. Only those logged in as a GM would see this 18. If I go over here to all of these campaign things, so if I needed to generate a cipher in the middle of a Numenera game and I didn't want the players to see what cipher I generated or anything that I went into it, or if I kept replicating or coming up with a new cipher until I saw one I liked, they would not see it because everything in here is with a G or a GM only roll option. Again, I use that a lot. It's one of my favorite ones. The opposite of the G or the GM would be S or self only. So if I put S and a colon, and then it would say 1d20 plus 7. If I clicked that, I would be the only one that saw this. So if I was playing a game and I was a player and I had my own macro, then the result would only be displayed to me. And there's one more that we could do, and this is the whisper function. And that's an option within MapTool. Also in the chat, you could whisper to someone, but if I replace this with a W, and then I'd have to put a parentheses in the name of someone, and then in parentheses, and then what would happen is when I click on that, what's in the parentheses would only be shown to the player Fred, or whatever name I just put in. You'll notice now I see I attack the darkness. I can't see anything. Only the person that I have that whispered to could see that. This would make sense if you're playing a game where you want to only let a single other PC know what you got. You could also make this for multiples. So I could put a comma in here after Fred and then put Joe, and then it would send it to those two people. Again, that stands for whisper. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to delete this. I'm going to go all the way back to, I like it with the tooltip, so I'm going to put a T in there and click OK. Now let's go ahead and look at some of my shortcuts and how I've done them. One of my first ones that I always make when I put it into a game, or if I have to reload MapTool for whatever reason, I always put in a clear chat. You may want to do this, you may not. When I'm putting together a game, I use this clear chat button a lot because I don't want all this information. So if I click on it, it literally just clears the chat window. This one's pretty simple. If I right click and edit, all it is //CLR. So I could do that same thing in the chat itself, /CLR, and it would clear. I just decided to make a macro shortcut. Now, as I showed in the first window, I also had die rolls that are public and die rolls that are GM. So let's look at this D2 to start with. If I right click and edit, you'll see that I have a bunch of words in here. And then you'll also see that I've included a way to change the font. Now, what's great about MapTool is it uses HTML formatting. So you can look up the number of different ways that you can manipulate font in HTML. So what I have here is I have a left caret, the words font color equals red, right caret, which means that code is done. What's here in between these carets is now HTML format, and it's changing the font to red. Then I want it to be bold, so left caret, B, right caret. And then I finally get to what I actually want to be rolled. I have roll option R : 1D2. I end it with a right bracket, and then here I've got my bold that I want to end, so I've got left caret /B, which means stop it, and then right caret, and then I want my font changed back to black, and so font color equals black. Don't know why that's in there. And I end with an exclamation point. And when I click OK and click on it, you'll see it spits all of this stuff out exactly how I have it formatted. Also under here, as I demonstrated in the first video, I have multiple rolls that I want to show for like multiple D6s or D4s depending on the damage or whatever game I'm playing in. If I open up this, there's a few things that we see first. Now I've done this a certain way and it works for me, and you don't have to do it the same way, but we have a couple of different roll options here. First, I have H : number equals time. So what that means is this number is going to save a variable of whatever I input for the number of times that I roll. So if I click on multiple Z6, it's looking for what I mean by times. Because times on my macro is not in quotation marks, it's evaluating it as a variable and not as text. So that would be a 4, let's say. And then when I click OK, it can finally do everything. So what happens is I'm asking for the number of times that I'm supposed to roll the dice, saving that as the word number or as the variable. Under here, I have die equals 6, and this was to make it easier for me to make all these multiple rolls. And then down here is where I actually have stuff that I want to come out. So I roll code, roll option R, number D6s. The total is, I change my font color, all this. Then I have to evaluate it with this, and we'll go over roll options like this later, but just know that if you want to pull from multiple spots, I have the tooltip roll option, roll this number of D6s, and then I have it finish out. And that's how that works for that. So that's why when down here, when I rolled those 4 D6s, you did not see these first 2 lines of code pop into the chat. If I were to come up here to the GM roll option, so let's look at the multiple D6 under GM, it would be very similar, at least up at the top. So I have number equals times. I've changed this a little bit, probably because I did them on different days and was experimenting, but now I'm saving the variable X as the outcome of the roll, a number of D6s. And that saves it as X. And then down here, I've made my output all one piece of code with the GM roll option, so only I can see it. I want to take a moment so that you can kind of look at what's going on here. And let's see if I can zoom in. So if I look in here now with it zoomed in, we can see my GM roll option, followed by the first thing we see is a quotation mark. So the way that this works now is anything within the quotation mark is now going to be output as just text. And so if we look after the quotation mark, I then have a plus number, which means add to this outcome whatever number is, and then add more text with quotation marks, which in it also includes HTML formatting, which is evaluated separately from the quotation, add X, and then add the last bit of text with more HTML, and then end with a quotation mark. If I left any one thing out of here, it would not process this correctly. If I left one plus out of here, if I left one quotation mark out of here, and if you're new to coding, you're going to find this to be somewhat frustrating, because you may go in and you may finish this beautiful piece of code that you've worked on forever, and you may leave out the plus in front of number. And if I hit OK and then hit multiple D6, it'll ask me for the number of times. Everything looks good so far. And it stops. I roll and it's got nothing else because I left that one plus out of there. It doesn't know what to do with the variable number, as I can see with this tooltip. So I'm going to go back in there with my multiple D6. I'm going to put that plus sign back. Now everything in this bracket, as I said, is GM only, and I had to do all of that extra work just so it would spit out, only so I can see it. If I come down here, I'm the only one that gets to see this outputted text. So that was a lot thrown at you, and I probably missed something that you might want to know about. So if there's something I didn't get to in this video or that you have a question on, please leave it in the comments below and I'll make sure to answer it in a sub-video that I'll add to the playlist and post later. So that's it right now. That's an intro to roll options and creating your first basic roll of 1d20 plus 7 or any of these other die rolls that we kind of went over. So I look forward to talking with you again, and have a great day.